Okay, so I just watched Lost a little bit ago. I'm going to talk about Lost. So be warned. I'm replying to somebody that I guess reviews Lost regularly that I haven't seen before. It was the first one that came up of a review, and he thinks the ending was poetic. Now, I've only talked about Lost a little bit, and it was in order to get in a fight with Bubonic Nate because we wanted to fight. Didn't really work as well as I'd hoped, but it was really Azranak who I'd had some discussions with about Lost. And, I'd sort of complained that he was over strict in his interpretation and his methods of deconstructing sci fi, and that, you know, for example, sci fi can have shallow characters and be good sci fi because the setting is one of the characters. And this is one of the things Lost has going for it. They created a great character, or what I might call a setting character, kind of character, which is the setting. And it's really good. And on the other hand, he was right. It turns out they didn't really use that well enough. I'm not going to waste time explaining Lost to people that aren't interested. Just don't watch the video if you don't know um, the show, because or do watch the video, and I won't waste your time telling you about the show. We'll just be talking about various issues. But some of them are just literary analysis. They, the last few seasons, they introduced characters when they could have reused old characters. I mean, they were diverging away from, okay, Lost was never hard sci-fi. It was weird science. But it was hard weird science in the sense that everything, would fit together. They didn't rely on quantum mechanics, even though they were doing time travel and things which might have wanted to rely on those. It was kind of retro in that it was all about, it's like Tesla's baby, just the weirdness of electromagnetic radiation. And there were some interesting things, to get on the island, you had to approach from a certain compass angle. At one point, somebody fired a research rocket from a boat at this correct angle, and it took a different amount of time to get there, depending on if you were on the boat or on the island. A corpse washed up that wasn't from a person that wasn't killed until the following day on the boat, washed up earlier than that. And some of these discrepancies could be seen because they could communicate by radio. Radio is an electromagnetic medium. There were funny things happening with electromagnetics. In a way, electromagnetics is an ordinary kind of science now, but it is still what relativity is based on, almost just as a thought experiment, just assuming that there's a fundamental thing. Electromagnetic radiation is sort of time. It's not time independent in the traditional sense, but it's like it's unperturbed by time. It goes at the same speed for everybody, no matter what else is going on with time dilation and space and anything else. It's a weird, it's a weird property. And according to the equations of relativity, which sort of fail at the speed of light, but asymptotically approach time stopping at the speed of light. So for every photon, time stops. So these are interesting things. I would have liked them to explore that. Um, Instead of explain a bunch of the faction of Widmore getting involved, that screen time could have been spent on other things. Now, getting away from the so-called explanations, be they science fiction or fantasy type explanations, is justified because they wanted to focus on the characters. That's fine, but I'm reminded of Stanislaw Lem. This is the thing I really like science fiction. One of the classic, truly a literary, a science fiction author that created literature. Stanislaw Lem, a Polish science fiction author. He criticized American science fiction at one point because while the settings were speculative, he believed that not only should the settings be speculative and experimental, right, putting people in strange situations, in an experimental nature, but the form of the story, the literary style used should be experimental. That this is one of the things that science fiction is for, is to explore different ways of telling stories. And and I believe that. So in the case of talking about character, you could do this in a science fiction way. You don't have to, because character is very flexible in a story. It's not good to make. It's not totally flexible. It's not easy to make one compelling. But you have a lot of flexibility. I mean, a bad character can see the light. You can do this in a scene or two. If you really want to do it well, you've foreshadowed it and all this. But basically, in a scene or two, somebody can see the light. You can explain this a lot easier than, let's say, explaining away some sort of scientific, logical necessity that's a natural conclusion of some little facts you happen to put in the show. That's harder to twist around. So when you focus on character, I don't know, when they negotiated to end the show, you think they would be careful about the hard parts, which is the technical ones, and still they could tell the same character story. And the thing about the experimental science fiction is just that I think part of the character story I would have liked them to tell more of is is, for example, between science the scientists of Dharma. You have a couple different kinds of scientists. You have a I don't care, people can die, whatever, Radinsky kind of scientist. You have Pierre Chang, and he does say things about, oh, they're doing these stupid things and on these other stations. You have biological scientists that are never explored. I would have rather go back to those people, when explaining what's going on, instead of having another band of Army Ranger type people and the Kimi thing. You know, we could have spent time going back to this or explaining the politics. Because that's the thing too. The Dharma initiative, when we got there, was kind of interesting. It's like, oh, there's politics, and these guys are petty, and they namaste, namaste, all enlightenment, but really there's this power structure, and it would have been interesting to see that and to see the corruption of that having led to Widmore and stuff. They just never explain that, and they say that it's character driven, but they're really just talking about the characters on that plane and some cameos from people that are on other shows and things, which is all fine. I'm not complaining. I'm not the kind of guy that complains about 6 years of enjoyment because of how it ends or resolves. The world they created, the ideas, I have a lot of ideas I think that would have been better endings. And I thank the Lost Riders for provoking those ideas. I don't blame them for not doing my version. That's fine. Um, I do think that the Flash Sideways thing is, you know, it was sort of poetic in the sense that I like those characters enough that I guess I was getting a little bit emotional with some of the reunions they arranged. On the other hand, it was cheap theatrics because it, I'm not an idiot. I know they created that Flash Sideways to look as though the bomb that went off worked and reset time and things were different. And in the end, they're going, nope, not really. So that's really what it was, a whole season long thing to say, hey, the bomb worked. No, it didn't really. And that's fine. So it's a reveal. You should put that fine. Science fiction, action, science fiction, fantasy. Good. You got a reveal. That's all about that. But that's a lot of time spent introducing these new storylines to say it's not really real when you had all of these elements, the Hansel Foundation and other character elements, okay, that could have been brought in. And I would have liked it as science fiction because sort of an unexplored area of science fiction that is interesting is politics between scientists. It's interesting. It's different than politics between politicians. It's more productive, and yet it's still just crummy politics. So it's like it's there's a lot of interesting stuff to play with there. So series was an enjoyable watch. It definitely failed at being literature in the end. It's just entertainment. On the other hand, the fan fiction might be literature. I mean, the island is really cool, and some of the elements could be much, much better explored. And I imagine that, forget fan fiction, that was just an offhand comment, but I think this will inspire some good stories.